So in this short interview, we're speaking with Agnès Hubert, a specialist on gender equality, especially in the European Union, a practitioner, also an academic. And we will speak about the gender equality policy inside the European Union, also based on a book that she has recently wrote, The European Union and Gender Equality. I even have it here. It's a primer by the Federation of the Foundation of European Progressive Studies. And so we will cover that and then go into a little bit of policy issues that are pressing today in the European Union.
Thank you very much, Marilia. I mean, it's quite an honor and a pleasure to sort of talk to you about my book and about gender equality policy, which I've been passionate about for a long time. My background is I'm an economist and a political science by training. Then I was a journalist and sort of started in the Commission a long time ago, in the European Commission, and sort of worked in the Commission for many years, including being the head of the gender equality unit for 5 years. I think it was probably one of the most exciting time of my professional life, because I was in touch with a lot of women's organizations, associations, with MEPs, with international organizations, of course, etc. So that was a very exciting time. And then I went on in the Commission, being in the think tank of the President mainly, and always trying to push the question of gender equality. Since I've left the Commission, I'm a visiting professor in the College of Europe in Bruges. I'm a member of the Haut Conseil de l'égalité in Paris, in the sort of International and European Commission. And I'm the co-founder of a feminist think tank, which is called Gender 5+. I realized when I was in the President think tank that we were in touch with a lot of think tanks around in the Brussels Beltway. And I was always the one to have to bring in the question of gender equality or women's perspective in all the issues we're sort of dealing with. And I thought we were missing a think tank that would be specialized on sort of women's rights and looking from a feminist perspective to European policies.
Great. So maybe let me start with a question about European integration itself, the European Union, how it was founded, and gender equality. You are making this argument that gender equality and European integration go hand in hand. How so? Also, especially considering that according to several polls, women are less supportive of the European Union than men. So isn't there a contradiction?
Thank you for this question, because it's very dear to me to try and think, to try and think too. I've sort of written a little bit on it as well. I mean, the European Union was created after the war to really create a union of basically regionally between France and Germany, but between all the belligerent countries, and to create a union based on solidarity in the sort of coal and steel sort of industries at the beginning, and and it went on. But it was really creating solidarity to sort of prevent war and to prevent sort of the brutal ravages of war. I make a parallel between the solidarity that I would say women have got to historically been sort of show, because they've been in charge of families much more than men, because they've had to sort of think about social issues and the well-being of people. And the sort of brutal force of what I would say the sort of traditional image of a patriarch, right? Or of the virility or masculinity, which is unfortunately now sort of again sort of coming up to be a sort of popular issue with some young people, which I'm quite frightened by. But I mean, this sort of extreme masculinity that people like George Moss, I don't know if you know this sort of American philosopher, was a Jewish by origin, Jewish philosopher, and would been sort of suffering the war, and was, I mean, he tried to sort of deconstruct okay, the whole sort of concept of masculinity and how it was sort of at the origin of the war. So sorry to sort of go into this sort of byway, but I mean, I really do think that there is as well, historically, we can see that whenever there's been sort of a push for European integration, more solidarity between member states, there's as well been a push for the gender equality policy, not only at EU level, but at national level also, right? And I mean, the rights of women have progressed there. I mean, it was the case, for example, in the 90s, right? When we had a sort of tremendous expansion in the lawyers and so on the structural funds, on having more sort of funds to spend for regional development, when we had I mean, a lot of sort of progress in EU integration, which led as well to the European Monetary Union, etc. And at the same time, I mean, we could achieve in gender equality policy sort of openings that we could never have before. I mean, like sort of going from the question of equal pay and the question of labor market, which was really at the early sort of birth of the equality policy, towards saying, well, I mean, we won't be able to sort of reach the objective of equal pay if we don't sort of widen the issue and sort of address as well the question of the status of women in society, political participation, etc. So that was on the reverse. We can see as well that we've got, I mean, in the years 2010 or around a bit, just after the economic crisis of 2008, we've had a real backlash on gender equality, but we had a very real backlash on the European integration as well, right? So, I mean, the two sort of go very much together.
Right. Yeah. So maybe it also has to do with this idea that the EU, one of the core values is exactly solidarity, how it was founded. And so gender equality also assumes that in a way, and therefore the more integration, the more gender equality will also face. But you already touched upon it a little bit by mentioning different stages of EU integration, different historical moments. So let me ask you a little bit more about those milestones of gender equality. How was it developing throughout the development of the European Union?
Okay, I will try and be as brief as possible because it's a long story full of anecdotes, which would be, I mean, really interesting to sort of tell about, etc. But anyway, let's say in the 60s, well, I mean, 58, but in the 60s, the Treaty of Rome, the fathers of Europe sort of with the Treaty of Rome realized that I mean, there won't be, I mean, the question of equality is not at the center, but the question of having a sort of a fair common market. And the textile industry at the time is very much sort of, I mean, works because of the women workers, right? And in Holland, which has got a very dynamic textile industry, there is no need to sort of pay women an equal salary. I mean, there's no principle of equal pay. Women workers are paid pin money, right? And in France, which was sort of where the industry was very powerful with the government and everything, at the time, the French new constitution after the war included the principle of equality between women and men, which meant that equal pay was a requirement, right? Not always invested, but I mean, you had to sort of give women a proper sort of pay, right? And this is what sort of gave rise to Article 119, which was in the Treaty of Rome, which was the member states committed to sort of equal pay for women and men. Well, the history of this article sort of is full of sort of ups and downs and everything. But I would say that the second event in the 60s was a number of women's strikes, including a strike in Belgium in hairstyle, where women workers started to ask for equal pay because they were really sort of very sort of they had a low pay, very bad working conditions and everything. So there was a social movement as well behind it, which was interesting. So let's go sort of quickly. The 70s, I think the 70s, starting with those strikes and everything, and a lawyer, Eliane Vogel-Polsky, a Belgian lawyer, who really followed up on the issue and brought a case of unequal treatment of women to the Court of Justice of an aerostess called Gabrielle Defresne. Then the European Court of Justice at the time, fairly progressively, sort of not only stipulated that the rule that the Article 119 was of direct effect, which means that you could sort of claim under Article 119 from a national court, but as well, it was, they stated that not gender equality, talking about equality between women and men, was a principle of the European construction, right? And that sort of gave rise to a sort of an amazing possibility of really expanding the policy into different areas. Okay, so I will sort of pass by the 80s and I will come to to the 90s probably, where this expansion really took rise with the Athens summit, where for the first time we gathered together a number of women in power. There were people like Edith Cresson, Simone Veil, Vassou Papandreou. There was Melina Mercouri at the time. For your generations, it's not significant, but she was a Minister of Culture for Greece at the time, and she was an extraordinary woman. All these women gathered together in 92 in Athens and sort of denounced the fact that there was a democratic deficit because there were not enough women in power. And that was a sort of landmark to really then a stepping stone, actually, for women's organizations, first of all, to sort of take more interest in Europe, saying, well, it's not only about sort of labor market, or, there is really something which concerns all of us, which is democracy, right?
I think parity democracy was the concept that they used, right?
You're very right. And that was really new because as well, it was a way to sort of, because quotas are an essential instrument and very often recognized as an essential instrument for a policy to actually sort of allow more women in decision making, but they are not popular. So that very often with women themselves. But parity democracy means that it's the essence of democracy to have a sort of mixed representation. To have as many women as men, to have, the representation of all sorts of underrepresented sort of categories as well, right? So, it was a concept which was much more, at the same time, philosophical, but as well, in a way, operational, because people could sort of identify with parity democracy, where they did not really like quotas. So sometimes they saw it as a corporatist issue. And this is an important issue for today as well, for, a lot of women who want to sort of be represented in politics and so on. And, they can claim on democratic values, basically. So shall we, I'll go on, sorry, a little bit quickly, but the 90s, you had the Beijing conference, let's sort of say as well, the sort of Beijing platform for action is still something which, like a vademecum, something which we always refer to as a text which has been agreed internationally, and which has got this issue of mainstreaming embedded into the text. When I say this issue of mainstreaming, gender mainstreaming means to integrate the perspective of gender equality or a feminist perspective into all the policies, right? I just give you an example. If you are in a municipal council, for instance, right, and you've got to make a decision, you've got a limited budget, and you've got to make a decision, what are we going to finance? Are you going to finance a football stadium, or are you going to finance childcare facilities? I'm sorry, it's a very sort of
stereotypical
choice, right? I take it just as an illustration, but I mean, it is obvious that if you've got more women in the municipal council, you're going to sort of make sure that you've got a balanced choice, right? You're not going to sort of finance football stadiums, even though football stadiums can be used by women, but very often the football stadiums are really the sort of, invested by boys mainly. And childcare facilities is an essential instrument for women to be on the labor market and to be so that the charge of children is taken up not only by the fathers but as well a little bit by the state. Okay. So I'm sorry. Hope it sort of remains sort of coherent. But I mean, if we go to the next decade, we've got the question of violence comes very much onto the European agenda in terms of gender equality. We will have the Istanbul Convention later, which is a very important text. We'll have Me Too as well, the Me Too movement, which is going to give a push. But before then, I mean, we've got the Daphne program in the European Union, and this question of violence starts to become a public issue, which is a good thing. But meanwhile, we've got enlargement, as you said, in 2004, 2008, etc. And enlargement changes quite a few things. First of all, in the European Union, we don't realize, but in the Council, when people negotiate, right? I mean, up to a group of 15 member states. I mean, you could negotiate like in a room, you've got sort of 15 people around the table, and you can speak from one to the other sort of personally. When you've got, it was 28 at the sort of highest point, and now we're 27. But when you've got all these people around the table, I mean, in the Council, you've got to have a much, much bigger room. And you speak through screens as well. You've got a screen in front of you, and to address the people at the other end of the room, right? So this is already a change. The issue is less personal. I mean, we've got to sort of take that into account. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of sort of networking of all sorts, but which sort of facilitates the decision making. But anyway, that's a general sort of, general element, which probably will sort of explain why it's been so much more difficult to sort of get decisions on, in particular, equality directives, right? The maternity directive was blocked in the Council and eventually withdrawn. The Women on Board directive, which has just been sort of agreed last year, was on the table of the Council for 10 years, etc. The anti-discrimination directive is still on the table of the Council. So, I mean, this made decision-making more difficult. Also, then I'm talking more of the sort of, on gender equality. At the beginning, I think there was far too little preparation of the, to put civil societies and movements and administrations as well together to discuss gender equality. To be a little bit sort of caricatural again, I would say that in the West, feminists thought that gender equality was a conquest, right? I mean, we had been fighting for our rights, right? And little by little obtaining a little bit more rights. I mean, in the East, I mean, for 50 years, equality had always been an obligation, right? Imposed by the state, and a sort of fairly austere equality. You could not make up, or you could not, I mean, all these things. You had to be like men, right? And that was not, I mean, that was not the type of equality that we're carrying in the West, but that was where Eastern European women were coming from. At the same time, when we were fighting for having more childcare, I mean, childcare was not an issue in the East, right? I mean, you had the childcare in your firm. Sometimes you wouldn't like the quality of the childcare, but you had nothing to say, or right? So, I mean, we came from very different backgrounds. And I remember discussions with researchers and etc. We said, well, I mean, in the first, after the 90s in Eastern Europe, the first sort of issue for young women was to make up or to sort of be extremely feminine and to sort of, I mean, the patriarchal sort of domination was not an issue for them. It was only later that it came to sort of be more an issue. So there were two different sort of, I would say, approaches at the beginning, which was difficult to sort of get the movement together. Still, afterwards, when things sort of develop, I mean, some countries sort of really sort of went very far, and probably when you see the gender equality index, you see that some of the progressions have been very fast in some from Eastern European countries, but the majority has been very slow. Why you can sort of see a lot of, I mean, if you take Hungary, I mean, that's probably sort of, I would say, more extreme case. Poland as well, the weight of religion has probably been higher, plus but I mean, in Poland, I mean, we sort of still have a lot of contacts with the, I would say, the movement on the ground, particularly people sort of working at a local level, right? Where you've got a lot of women, particularly young women, who fight for very progressive policies with a government which fights for, I mean, traditional families and sort of women not sort of going to work and etc. Sorry, I'm very sort of long. I would sort of finish by 2020 probably, right? Just to sort of make a full panorama. And then I must say we're still in the process of assessing, and it will go on. But I think having, for the first time, a woman at the head of the European Commission has made a change, right? She's lived through very, very difficult sort of times, COVID, climate change, etc., and the Brexit, etc. But still, I mean, right from the beginning, Ursula von der Leyen, in a first speech in front of the European Parliament, sort of really stressed that she wanted to fight for a union of equality. We will assess after the 5 years what has been done, but I mean, she's really started to have with a dynamic strategy of gender equality for the next for the 5 years, 20 to 25. She sort of fought as well for the rights of LGBTIQ categories. We've got much more research, etc., plus a strategy on anti-discrimination. So she's fought for having something on violence against women, and now the EU can even become a sort of official member of the Istanbul Convention. So these are all things that may not sort of come to the realization of people on the ground, but I mean, this is really something which is making us, I mean, probably more optimistic for the future. despite the very strong anti-gender sort of movement that we're seeing internationally, and which is a threat to gender equality. Sorry, I was very
Right.
long.
No, it was a very comprehensive overview. Thank you very much for it. And so after this historical outlook, maybe we can go also a little bit to the policy level. You've already mentioned the gender equality strategy of the European Union, which is now set up until 2025. Can you maybe say a couple of words about it? And also a question, how binding is it? How are states really following it? Are they really implementing all the directions, or why yes, why not? And what are the problematics of it maybe as well?
Well, this is a good question. I mean, the gender equality strategy is the sort of continuation of a sort of long policy, but I mean, it's probably much more progressive than any of the 5 years program ever before, right? The three words which sort of underline the gender equality strategy is free, thrive, and lead, right? Free from violence, right? Thrive in the labor market and in economic life, and lead. That means in decision making. I mean, sort of get into politics, get into the boards of big companies, and make sure that we've got a sort of parity, democracy, which is at the which is sort of leading us to a better future, right? So free, thrive, lead. What are the instruments at European Union level? I mean, when I say it's important to have Ursula von der Leyen, is that she's much more determined. But the 10, 15 years before had been a very low-key sort of way on gender equality policy. And as I said, post-enlargement, I mean, it's been so difficult to sort of get any new text through the council, etc. I mean, the instruments we've got at European level are, on the one hand, the legal instruments, right? Not only the directives, which are like a sort of legislation to be implemented by the national parliaments, but we've got as well over 200 case law. I mean the European Court. It's now the European Union Court of Justice has really sort of made an amazing jurisprudence on gender equality issues, right? We've got as well, which is important, we never realize when we want to push equality. I mean, we've got to know, I mean, we measure what we treasure. We've got, when I arrived in the gender equality unit in 1990, people were saying, oh, you know, statistics, if you go to net 3, I mean, it's so expensive and so on, we cannot integrate another issue. We didn't have enough statistics on gender equality at all, on the differences between women and men and so on. And I mean, this has increased tremendously, not only Eurostat, but as well the European Institute for Gender Equality, which is based in Vilnius, right, is doing a tremendous job and is publishing regularly the Gender Equality Index, which gives you, which I will sort of recommend that you go and see the EU Gender Equality Index on their site. It gives you a measure of where we are in gender equality. We've progressed very, very slowly because we've got this Gender Equality Index in 2010. We've progressed, I'm going to be wrong in the figures, so excuse me, but from about sort of 61, I think, up to now we are about 65 or 66 out of 100, right, in terms of reaching equality. And then you've got per country the all the statistics where it's progress or not. So, I mean, this is the measure, the data is something very important. We've got as well that, I mean, a lot of research, which is sort of gathered by the European institutions in particular. We've got strong institutions. We've got in the European Parliament, a FAM committee, a sort of a committee for women's rights and gender equality, which is really doing an extremely good job for pushing the equality issues in the European agenda. What else is there? So, these are the instruments that we've got at European level. But of course, we talk about subsidiarity. I'm sorry, I'm going to sort of skip the word, but because it's a little bit difficult. But it is true, the responsibility for a lot of social policies, including for gender equality, has got to be realized by member states and regions in the first place. I told you about the football stadium and the childcare facilities, right? This is decided at local level, right? So if the local level is not convinced that it's going to have an interest, you can publish all the directives you want, right? Make them as sort of binding as possible. And it is binding to a certain extent, right? When it's been decided by the council, then it is it is discussed and made into legislation by the national parliaments. It's got to be implemented, but it is or not, right? So there are instruments at European level which are certainly very useful, very important to sort of push the national governments, encourage the local governments, encourage the social society movements as well. But it's not the end of the story. It's really on the ground that you've got to sort of realize that gender equality is going to benefit everyone, and not only a small corporation of feminists who are sort of fighting for it.
Right. I think in this way, the pandemic might have had some sort of a positive effect on the realization how important the role of women in the society is, and how they contribute actually to the economy, that they are actually doing a lot of unpaid work. It has become more visible right now, although it's been there for a while already, for a very long time. So, and in connection to that, I think you're also suggesting in the book to come up with a new economic model or economic concept, how to treat basically different branches in the economy, and what importance to assign to them, sort of. And you call it caring economy. It's a very ambitious concept, as I understand, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that and say what specific steps can the member states of the European Union take right now in order to come closer to this idea.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, because it's really important. It's probably more a heuristic concept now than it's sort of an actual political instrument. But even though the Commission has published last year, at the end of last year, a sort of a care strategy, which is made of a few directives, etc., which is going to be important as much as the European Council sort of decides on it progressively. So that's probably going to progress issue. Why caring economy? Because we'd realized for a long time, and that's not new, that even in Beijing, I remember the UNDP, I think, had published a book saying that, you had the productive economy, which was about sort of, a line which was about at the top of everything, but a small line, and below, which was about 3 or 4 times the importance of the productive economy, you had the reproductive economy, which was very much unpaid for, right? The reproductive economy was all the sort of the economy of the family, of unpaid work, of the care which was provided mainly, not only, but mainly by women, which sort of was the essential sort of base on which you could sort of build a productive economy. But in policy making, in the sort of public world, you could see only the productive economy. And in the figures, starting with the GDP, you can only see the productive economy, right? So as you said, COVID was certainly a realization that, I mean, you could not sort of let down things like sort of the health sector, education sector, but all the sort of food production, the sort of caring after children, caring after older people, caring after those who need it in general, including disabled, etc. You could not sort of let it out of the economy. This was as well work. This was productive sort of activities and so on. And this is on this basis, plus the idea that we are in sort of aging societies, right, with more and more sort of elder population, which will probably need more and more care, right? So there's really a need to sort of, I'm going to add another thing as well, probably the fact that, let's say that we are in more, it's a little bit difficult to say at the moment when there's so much poverty as well, but we are in fairly affluent economies in the West in general, right? And the aspiration of people is not for having more material goods so much, but it's really for more well-being, right? So I think the time is right now to produce instruments of public policy which are really going to put forward this issue that what people want is more well-being, right? I mean, and care is part of this well-being. If you don't have more solidarity between people, more sort of, I would say, attention to one another and so on. So you don't produce attention to your neighbor, but through political policy only, but you can have policies that will encourage this sort of, this caring economy, starting with increasing the budgets of the health, education, but as well of everything to do with childcare or elder care, or with sort of helping families to sort of be at the same time on the productive market, but as well have a sort of a good caring sort of climate as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and for all of your insights. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. That was a very enjoyable time.